Today I want to talk a little about deviance, which probably is something that a lot of people are interested in. Not necessarily a sociological meaning of it, but I think that's what we have to talk about today. Not so much the deviance itself. But let's first start with a definition of deviance. And we've talked about norms in the past, which norms are the rules of accepted society, normally unwritten, and they are, well, we'll talk about how it's necessary and how the norms are really important, but deviance means moving away from the norms. And I mean, just think what might be deviant. Is lighting up a cigarette in the middle of class deviant? Or is marrying your first cousin deviant? What about showering once a week? Or if a woman drives a car, is she being deviant? And the answer is that they all are, in some cases, and sometimes in some places. Are crimes deviant? Well, crimes probably are necessarily deviant because you can't get arrested for them. But for instance, there's a law in Massachusetts that says that it's illegal to go to bed without first having taken a full bath. If you get arrested for that, then you would be considered deviant, or are you? Or in Rockville, Maryland, it's illegal to swear while driving on the highway. Are you deviant if you do that? I'm not so sure. Because it might be actually what the norm is in that case, within that social structure. Generally speaking, we would say that is deviating from the norm, the accepted standard of society. So laws would not necessarily be the accepted standard of society in that case. But we can actually define deviance in two possible ways: as behavior that violates the social norms, right? And the person who engaged in such behavior. And if that was the case, then you can define the norm and you can measure away from the norm. But it can also be defined as the behavior which is defined as deviant according to the reactions of the society. This is not just a semantic play on words. Because one, you can define the norm and then see what goes away from it. And the other one, you're defining how people are reacting, and then you're saying what the norm is. And it would make a great deal of difference. Like, for instance, if you say that people will be considered deviant enough because the norm is set by a particular organization or a particular level of like a government or in society can define a norm, and then who goes away from the norm is considered deviant. For instance, speeding. Generally speaking, the society will say, in general society, most places in the United States, if you go 10, 15, 14 miles an hour of the speed limit, you're not considered deviant according to according to the way people are. It's normally practiced in the United States. But on the other hand, it can be defined as deviant because that's what the law is, and you can get a ticket for going 11 miles over the speed limit in Arizona, for instance. But in New Jersey, that's not going to happen. So the deviance is not because the social norm, which is 11, 12, 13 miles over an hour, is not a big deal in most places in the United States. But if it's defined as the norm and then you're deviant away, and then you can be castigated for it, and how that is actually acts in reality and in the real world, that's what's going to define it in that case. So when we go back to our examples, for instance, lighting up a cigarette in class, right? Is that considered deviant? Well, in 1980, in universities, people did that all the time. Wasn't a problem. And probably in some places in the world, it's not a problem until today, right? Marrying your first cousin. Most Americans would say that it is deviant. There's something wrong with that. But in most places in the world, it's not. And even within the United States, there are some societies, because it's not illegal, it wouldn't be considered deviant. It's perfectly acceptable. What about showering only once a week? That certainly was the norm in most places in the world for most times. But today in the United States, people generally shower every day. Or what about if a woman drives a car? Is she considered deviant? Well, in Saudi Arabia, she would be. As a matter of fact, she can be put into jail. So you can see that these things differ according to the place and time. And that's really what makes it defined as deviance, as how it is accepted within that society. Just like in some total institutions, such as Marine base camp, Marine basic training in the Marines, right? So if you don't say yes sir and end off every single sentence with sir, it's a major crime. If you're not properly groomed, it's a major crime, where it's not necessarily that in the rest of the society. I think that it's really important to know that how we're going to define who defines what is deviant and who defines what's not. You know, when we talked about the dramaturgical model, we talked about how the world can be constructed and seen as on a stage, and the productions which go into the stage, and front stage and backstage, and how that on a global in a conflict perspective, we can see how major organizations like the government or the media are putting on a show in order to us and convince us what is proper or improper and the ways to think and things like that, because they put all this production together. In the study of deviance, we call these same people who have that power the claims makers. So in other words, a person in government can make a claim that this is right or this is wrong. And they put enough information and enough work into convincing us that this actually becomes a major idea. Now, for instance, the idea of taking a shower every day. It seemed to be very useful in American society, because at that point, then we're going to be selling more soap, for instance. Is it actually healthier? Not necessarily, but that's the way we do it. Now, what about advertising? Cigarettes. We seem to know now that they're unhealthy. Was it only because of the 1963 or 64 Attorney General's report? Did they know about that beforehand? Oh, they certainly did. It was well known. Asbestos, for instance, the major producer of asbestos, I forgot the name of the company, knew all along that it had a major health risks. But in that case, even though they were not making the claim, they did not produce that. They said it was safe. They don't have any consequences against it. Today, because of the government pressure, we know that cigarette smoking is not healthy. And so the government is changing those claims. What about if we want to take, for instance, other possibilities of claims makers? Scientists, right? Scientists always make claims that this is the way the world is or the way the world is not. But we've talked about the basic theories of science, where science can, as a structure of knowledge, can't make a claim of anything be 100% true or not true. And that's the nature of science. And they still will be claims makers in the society. Professors do the same thing. Teachers will do the same thing. And all those people are the claims makers of society. They are the ones who, they are people within, or groups of people, or organizations, or bureaucracies, or movements, or industries, which make the claims and set what is the norms and what is not norms. And not that norms are bad. Norms are really important. Because without norms, we don't have any way of conducting society. Think of what is a norm in the society. I mean, for instance, let's say if you go around, it's not, a norm is not to say hello to walk down the street and say hello to everybody you pass. Or if you go into the bathroom, into the men's room, the ladies' room, and talk to everybody while they're busy doing their stuff in the bathroom. Or go into the elevator and face the back of the elevator as you go in. Or you're sitting in a restaurant and you take food from other people's plates. It makes things difficult to without the norms of behavior, we're going to have a hard time actually functioning in society. I mean, those are relatively minor situations, but the other, let's say, for instance, you go into a doctor's office and the doctor remains in the room while you're disrobing. It's going to be extremely difficult to continue, and uncomfortable to continue, because that's not the norm. And there would be some sort of implications of doing that, right? Or on the other hand, let's say you have to, you're going out for dinner, or you're going out for to the movies, and you're in your formal clothes or your work clothes. You're in a suit, and you want to get into more comfortable clothes. So, but you're going straight from work to meet your friends. So you change your clothes on the subway on your way to meet your friends. There's something that's not quite according to the norm, and there has to be some mechanism in order to enable us to actually go on with society and keep things going and work with those norms, right? With those norms to keep people from becoming deviant in order for society to keep on going. And what we'll talk about next is how we actually, what are the mechanisms we do in order to keep things going according to the norms and in a more healthy and ongoing fashion. And that we'll be talking about things such as sanctions in the next section, in the next lecture.